Welcome. Welcome to episode, for lack of a better term, episode 2 of 4 in these Liberated Love mini master classes. We're going to get into some really beautiful practices and some really expansive ways of looking at energy and the relational energy between self and other people. And we're going to start that on the other side of one of the foundational practices as a experience to journey into this phase, this part of the episode, so that you can do so in a grounded way. So my invitation is to offer yourself to some guidance for about 10-ish minutes to go on a little journey into the energies of your subtle energy fields. So commit to focusing your presence and attention on my words and on your body for a short period of time. And see what shows up. See if you can offer yourself attention, or see if your mind starts to wander. You start to notice your attention moving to the busyness or the familiarity of your life. That's okay if that happens. You can just locate, oh, my mind is wandering, and come back to noticing the energies. So if it's helpful to do so, you can close your eyes. And you can do this practice seated or laying down. But either way, you want to bring one or both of your hands to your low belly, the space of the lower dantian. And you're going to breathe so that your breath, as it comes in through your nose, travels all the way down into this low part of your belly so that you can experience your belly pushing your hands out. So each breath, you're noticing your belly rise and fall. And there's nothing to do. It's more of an arriving in this space of consciousness. You're allowing your awareness to collect in this one place in your body. And you're anchoring it through paying attention to the somatic intelligence, the somatic sensations that are in the low part of your belly. So with your inhale, your belly expands. You can imagine filling a bowl with warm breath. With each exhale, track for your body softening. So you inhale, fill the bowl. Exhale, soften around. Feel and notice that there is a glow that is pooling in the base of your pelvis. This is the sexual energy of your life force. It's sometimes called Jing. So just noticing that with each breath, this warm breath and this place in your body, that Jing, that sensual, sexual life force energy starts to build. Now imagine that energy beginning to move, not rushing, but just starting to rise and move towards your spine. Feel it traveling along your low back, up your mid back, up the back of your neck. Imagine it pooling now in the crown of your head and collecting and pausing So that as you move from your inhale into an exhale, start to notice that melting down the front of your body, melting over your face, your throat, your heart, and then returning to the belly where it begins to pool again. So as you inhale, this orbit rises up the spine and the back body, pauses at the top, and then as you exhale, melts down the front body. A soft energy wave moving in coherence with your inhale and your exhale. This is a practice for tracing your microcosmic orbit, and it's already there. You're not making it become anything. You're not building something new. It's simply a drawing your attention towards and allowing yourself to feel the sensations. The glow in the belly, the sensation arising along the back body, and then the letting go across the front of your front body so that you can move more deeply into the sensations of softening. In your next breath, you can take a full breath where you retain the breath at the top. Imagine collecting at the pause at the top of your breath, the top of your crown. And when you're ready, after you sustain that hold for what feels meaningful to you, you can let that out of your mouth as an audible sigh. And simply come back to the space. Back to your normal breath. See if you can stay present to this microcosmic orbit as we draw you into some teachings. So like I mentioned in the beginning, this is part 2. If you didn't catch part 1, this will still make sense, but maybe I'll recommend that you check out part 1 of the Liberated Love sequence of mini master mistress classes. We talk a lot in the first one about safety and about fear and about the ancient survival nervous system, as well as yang and yin terms. A lot of the teaching in the previous episode was about polarity. So polarity is referring in this teaching to the primal forces of energy of yang and yin, or yang and yin. And I teach this in a multitude of ways, and I use the terms masculine and feminine and dom and sub, and a variety of terms that are related to these energies. So however you show up in your body and the way you experience yourself in your personhood, that can be a place where you adopt one of these places of attention. And you get to choose what those are. So whatever you call yourself is welcome. We're just looking at the primary forces of energy. So yang being this outward gaze, or the occupying the archetypical energy of the one who wants to ravish or penetrate energetically or anatomically, physically. This is the more dominant energy and polarity, as opposed to the submissive energy. And that there's a relationship with the outside world and the environment and the container. And each in organization to each other has like a longing that's created within that. So from the yang disposition, there's a longing for trust. From the yang disposition, there's a longing for attention and protection in order to experience an inward gaze where there's all of this juicy information about life and ourself and these expanded concepts that are separate from our conditioning, which is a big part of why Chris and I are so drawn to this teaching. It's like, what an incredible opportunity for alchemy and to understand yourself in a new way, to get playful with that. So we're going to be teaching off of this slide today. But before we come back to this slide, I want, I want Chris to kind of speak a little bit about Tantra and sort of these elements of teaching in the way that you've been like guiding me in this teaching of Tantra. In particular with the fire and the water and the organizations of the fire and the water and the, the negative and the positive poles. And yeah, maybe I'll leave it up for now. We'll just speak from here and then we'll kind of go into it. Does that sound good, Chris? Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thanks for that lovely process you guided us through. So, Tantra or alchemy are more or less interchangeable words. Tantra is a term from India, from the Sanskrit tradition, and alchemy would be the term that would have been used more in Taoism, which is China or in the West in the alchemical tradition. But they have all the same kind of symbols, they have all kinds of similar type practices. So there's a lot of overlap, and the words can be used very, very closely, if not more or less kind of interchangeably. So Tantra means weaving. That's just the root of the word. So weaving together, for example, touch or sound or color would have been one weaving, just literally as in weaving a fabric. But ultimately, it starts to come to mean weaving together spirit and matter. The idea that the material form and all the kinds of pieces that show up in our incarnate human lives are themselves the vessels or the conduits for the expression of the divine, rather than some kind of idea that we need to go, the body's some heavy, weight, and our soul really wants to fly into the ether and it holds us down, and we need to get liberated from the prison of the flesh, or all of this. Tantra is any kind of teaching that says no, that the body is sacramental. The body and our emotions, and in this case, particularly our sensuality and our sexuality, and therefore our connection to Eros and life force, is, or at least can be, a conduit for really beautiful sacred expression. Alchemy, as a term, refers to, or one version of which refers to the idea of the creation of an otherwise paradoxical opposition element known as fire water. So typically we would think of the four classic elements of the earth, the air, the the water and the fire. Of those two, usually water and fire are seen as opposites. Either you have too much fire and it extinguishes or evaporates the water, or you have too much water, pour it on a little fire, and the fire goes out. So alchemy is the idea that somehow we can combine into something that is greater, or the over unity there, if you like, um, than the sum of the parts. And how we have to do that is the creation of a crucible or a container. So think of your classic, high school chemistry class. Got some kind of vial or something in the lab, and then you've got the Bunsen burner or whatever, the little flame underneath it, and then slowly the water starts to bubble and to boil. So what we've got on the screen here is an image of how we might start to think of these polarized forces within the play between two individuals. And when that's the case, we actually have four energies, not just two, because there's a yang and a yin within each person. So in this case, in this image, we've got a male and a female, but it could be, two males, two females, whatever, etc. So someone occupying the more predominantly yang pole and someone occupying the more predominantly yin pole. So if you look at those images of the yin yang, the classic images there along the sides, you'll see that there's first of all, the first part of the image is that it's all contained within a circle of wholeness. So we're always trying to emphasize fundamental communion or unity, number one. And then within that, you have a more predominantly yang half of the circle, which is that sort of creamish color. And then the predominantly yin half, which would be like the kind of purple, or usually see it kind of more like a black and white, whatever. And then notice there's a little bit of purple inside of the beige cream color, and then a little bit of that beige or cream inside of the purple. So there's four elements. There's the person who might be more predominantly yang or directive, but they have their own inner sensitive yin energy. And the person who wants to be in the polarity more predominantly yin and receptive, but they have their own active or directive pole within themselves. And so to create the cyclotron, which is to say, this idea of, well, over unity is the idea that think of some kind of um, invention somebody might create that requires a little bit of energy to input, like a flywheel or like Tibetan prayer flags that get moved by the wind kind of thing. So a little bit of energy input, but then what comes out on the output is greater than the input. So it actually, rather than, your car or anything where there's heat loss, there's a bit of energy input and then there's more output than input. And then you can learn to siphon a bit of that extra to basically create a flywheel so that it can just run on itself. Take a little bit of that extra output, put it back as the input, and more output comes out. Take a little bit more of that, tie that back in, and creates this self-replicating system of generativity. And whether that's in an individual life or whether that's in a couple, that's basically the life of Eros. We end up having a bit of practice and energy input that we put in, but the output, the blessing, and what we receive is actually way, way more than what has been put in. And then we can learn to basically enter that back into the process and it just feeds on itself. So in a couple, for example, this is how you create long-term Eros. Not just, oh, we fell in love and now the chemicals are flying and then it's 3 years later and now the falling in love phase is over and now it's supposed to get like boring and static. Instead, this can like just continue to deepen into deeper and deeper layers of erotic intimacy. So another word for yang and yin is fire and water, elementally. So the yang is fire, it's directive, it's agentic, and the yin is water. And there are locations for both individuals and a couple. So for the yang individual, which in this picture is the male form there, the fire is going to be in the sexual organs and the water is going to be in the heart. And so for that individual, is indicated by that arrow kind of going up and down. The main practice and what we'll be focused on in the course is the ability to connect their heart to their libido and their sexual energies. So there's this principle in Taoist sexual alchemy that the fire needs to be under the water. So for the yang individual, they start off already with their fire under their water. They need to connect them consciously, but it's already there, which means that individual will enter arousal faster from a time point of view than their partner. And basically, the world's expressions, TVs, movies, porn, everything in all the objectification and everything is based on the yang disposition towards arousal, right? Two kisses and they're going at it, right? In the movie or whatever. So there's because for the yang, there that's probably honestly about if they have a nice, healthy relationship to their sexual energy and their libido, that's their fire's already down there. They're ready to go. This process is based on the countercultural and quite revolutionary idea of actually orienting the process to the arousal pattern of the yin, which is quite opposite. So as you can see, for the yang individual, the fire's in the sexual organs and the water's in the heart. And then for the yin person, it's flipped. So in that image, the female, the water is in her sexual organs and the fire is in her heart. So this principle that the fire needs to be under the water, which is indicated by that swooping arrow. And the question is, how does the fire get under the water and then heat up the water, essentially, from underneath? And the answer is by focusing on the fire inside of the yin partner. And by that we mean adoring, beholding, containing, alluring, appreciating, witnessing, and focusing the connection to the heart of the submissive or yin receptive partner so that that fire builds up at the level of their heart slowly, but is being gently fire tended and stoked. And as that fire energy in their heart starts to build up, it will eventually overflow from their heart and flow down to their root. It'll flow down underneath the sexual organs. And then we've got a fire source underneath the container of the water. And now it's going to start to slowly entice and arouse and start to warm up the watery energy in that being. And by the water here, we mean deep feeling, deep sensitivity and tenderness, and a deep desire to go inward and feel deeper forms of sensation intimately. So as it starts to get heated, they desire the yin, interestingly, goes more and more inward, as we had in the last image there in the last slide, where the yin is an inward gaze. As the yin becomes aroused in this way, and they're not having to be oriented to perform or to care give or please someone else. And this is a big part of the shift for the yin partners if they've been conditioned to have to be performing or oriented to the yang arousal position or needing to, put on a certain play or please someone else. They might have disconnected from their own inner feeling and sensation. So there's a huge green light, and it takes a lot more time and it's much more slowed down for them to start to turn in to this process of entering into their own ecstasy. Actually feeling that fire getting warming up and warming up their water. And then they start to get the fire water. They get both the heat of the fire and the arousal and the passion, and the deeper and deeper sensitivity and sensation from the water, and they start to melt or they start to steam. And as they do so, they go inwardly, which means the yang partner, the Dom, is going to have to hold the space and be completely attuned to the yin partner. So they're going to start going within the yin, and the yang has to hold the space so that they are really safe, that they're really held in a bubble of love and enveloped with safety and trust. And then that gives them the permission to go more and more inward. And that fire is now really starting to go. And because the person who's more yin has a lot of water, when it gets heated up, if and when it becomes like a cauldron, and then their desire and potential for experience, for ecstasy, for arousal is kind of off the charts at that point. And yin wants to receive. So at that point, when there's really deep arousal, they will long for some form of deep encounter, deep communion, deep penetration. And that will lead to that phase of the process until eventually that's complete. And then there's a phase of them being held through a deep form of integration because it's a really deep, can be a deep dive that they go into if they get that deeply inflamed and that deeply aroused and ravished, and then to be held through it. They come out the other end of it profoundly whole. And there's a form of love and intimacy that's then expressed in gratitude from the yin to the yang. That's how we start to experience the ongoing self-replicating nature of the cyclotron of over unity.
I feel like I need to like just share with everybody that when Chris was kind of teaching me these principles, that just kind of came out as where he was talking about it as like the cyclotron of over unity. And I feel like he was kind of kidding when he shared it. And I was like, oh no, we're using that. I'm putting that on a slide because I just felt like it like really beautifully gives people an understanding of like there is so much more possible between one or two or more people that are consciously working with their energies than we have potentially been conditioned in our lives to believe was safe or that we were allowed to have access to. And so, as a result of cultural conditioning or the attachments that have felt safe in your life up until a certain point, there can be this stagnation that occurs when it's time to evolve into something new. When we get the opportunity to step into a new initiation of knowing ourselves beyond the ways that we've known ourselves, often that experience doesn't look like, wow, I'm so fulfilled with my new experience. It can look really terrifying. It can look really confusing and just sort of like this stale experience of love, which, if you're a deeply devotional or committed partner, maybe you're somebody that has really been sticking it out and staying in this space of like we're unconsciously moving through life, wondering if there is something more available. And I would say there is a cyclotron of over unity that you may or may not have been taught about. And yeah, maybe I'll just kind of keep going for a little bit and speak about some of the terms that Chris used and or like spoke to. And I'll maybe just give them like a little bit of like the mystical kind of anatomy side of what I have found is really neat for people to understand in their empowerment journey is well, first of all, I'll maybe say if you're finding this, this video or this episode, a lot of what I work with is women that have had some experience where they're not able to access the neuroception, the intelligence of their somatic body because of, you know, relationships of wounding around sexual energy, relationships of prioritizing other as a necessity of getting through life, where there's an attachment wound where other people's energy became more important than your own energy. And that can lead to an unconscious body experience. And that can lead to all kinds of symptoms, psychological, physical, and relational, that are indicating that there's like more here. There's more to learn. There's more expansion available. But if nobody shows you or talks to you about what's available, it's not as easy to find. And like you said, Chris, like we live in a society that is conditioned around the process of a yang or a masculine sexual process, where for much of my experience anyway, it was like, oh, like when the masculine comes, that's the end. Like this is our time. We got like a span of time. And it's related to this recipe that is in movies or in pornography or kind of spoken about as like, yeah, well, that's kind of how sex goes. And so, yes, this could be as a practice in sex. And yeah, it's a really beautiful way to go. It's the energies remain the same. Like however you want to play with these energies, being able to play with these vital force energies is something that um, is like, yeah, I love how Chris says, this is our birthright. You keep coming back to this place of like, we are alchemists and we're divinely conscious beings that have this playground available to us. And there is the opportunity to practice receiving more consciousness in your body, regardless of which role you want to play in this consciousness. If you are deciding to experience it through the yin and the inward gaze and the enlivening of your female body consciousness, in my experience, there's a tremendous amount of fulfillment that is there, which ultimately leads to this yield, like you were saying, where the other partner is like, wow, this is so beautiful to behold somebody that is deeply fulfilled. And now I'm experiencing a deep fulfillment as a result of that. And it really is a very generative experience. So, containment. Containment, I like to teach kind of from the perspective of the nervous system and the nature of the nervous system to want to know where it is in space and to want to know where it is relative to safety in space. And so something that shows up as a behavior often in women coming to their maybe masculine partner, I'll just use that expression, but whoever it is that you're seeking containment from the expression of a yin or an expression in a woman's body can be this busyness in the head and this hypervigilance of like bad and wrong and things are bad and wrong and all of life is not going in the direction that feels good to me and I need you to fix it for me. I need you to, in some way make this bad and wrong go away. However that comes out, right? It's about the kids or the car or the things in life, but ultimately often what it is a plea for containment of like I am in my head and my energies actually are more organized with my energy being lower in my body, closer to my heart, closer to my womb space. But I live in this masculine world where I've been working or I've been managing and solving things with my mind. And now my body is calling me to come back in. And I don't know my body's calling me to come back in. But we go to our partners or we go to these people in our life and we commiserate over these problems. But really what we're seeking is to be drawn down and into ourselves. So sometimes we'll have the understanding that we're looking for that and we'll say, like, can I have a hug? Like a hug is a really great example of containment, to have somebody wrap their arms around you and pull you into yourself. What they're doing is they're stimulating the receptors in your body that are trying to find out where you are in space. And they're trying to get organized and they're trying to get you organized into where you're most aligned, where you're where you're most supportive to each other in your energetic expression. So when we're tangled in our energy, and I feel like most people will understand that experience of being tangled and confused and disrupted in some way where you're looking for polarity, but you don't know that you're looking for polarity. That's uncontained. That's fractured energy. And it's kind of all over the place. These people, when you run into them, whether you're one of them or if you're observing one, it's that experience of somebody being ungrounded, right? They're just kind of, they're speaking in this tone from their voice up, which is sort of annoying. Even it kind of, it's like jostling to our system where we're like, oh, it's like something actually, this person's seeking containment, but they maybe don't know that they are. And so they'll have a high-pitched laugh or they'll have this place where we don't really feel like we're grounded beside them. And so that's kind of part of our intelligence systems that's like reading. Like this would feel better if it was in some way drawn down into the heart and drawn down into the belly And so I like to share this just because we do this all the time already. You know, we do this with our children, we do this with the people that we love, hopefully already. But what you're doing is you're drawing somebody down more into their body by giving them a hug. As a practitioner, and when I taught practitioners, one of the things that is like the fastest way to help a person's body relax is the receptors that are looking for where we are in space. Most of them are in our joint capsules. So that's why squeezing a person communicates to the body to come towards center and to drop your energy down, to regulate towards your midpoint, and for them to do the same in a complementary way. So simply by squeezing a joint, you create a space where the body just exhales. And we all kind of know that feeling of like, ah, oh, that feels better to come into myself. It feels better. So it has this beautiful side effect where our endocrine system, our glandular system that is related to our chemical messenger system, it also has a collective exhale. Our cortisol levels go down. Our restorative feminine expression, if you're in a yin body, the yin body benefits from coming down to its watery basement, the pelvis, and residing in the wateriness and the cyclical nature of the wateriness of a woman's body. So when we're hot and dry and in the yang or the yang of life so much, it can kind of have this sort of agitation, hypervigilance, dryness experience to it. So that is the body longing to come more into this. And sometimes when we move from a space of living our life rather dissociated in hypervigilance, and then moving and pendulating into this more aligned expression of our energies, water comes out. You know, it's actually quite an incredible thing that the body knows to release extra amounts of hormones like cortisol through tears, through these expressions that the body does as a result of relieving stress from the body. So, like, juiciness in life is a healing side effect. You know, it's not the purpose, but it's what the body does as a result of that. So, yeah, I really feel like that that is a really beautiful thing to understand in this, is that we're wanting to move towards this organically. And when we're not, there can be this agitation that's like seeking it. And then the other thing that I love to teach that you've been speaking to, it was more so in the last one, and that is the nature of the mystery of life, and yin being inherently connected to this mystical or mystery experience. So sometimes when I work with women and it can show up, I'd love to know if other people notice this as a feminine. It's like, well, I don't know. You can tell me a little bit from a masculine perspective, Chris, and also sort of what you see. But this mystery thing can kind of be like, I don't want to go in there. I don't want to go into the mystery. Who knows what's in the mystery, you know? And I feel like just like this, like underscoring the gap between the one that's trying to keep us safe and the one that's like the enrichment feeling. That's that first kind of step into the mystery. And we are all longing to have a relationship with the mystery in some way or another, whether it's coming out sideways in addictive patterns or fighting, or, you know, these agitations that we can have where we're looking to open the aperture of pleasure and receiving, but we don't necessarily know how to get our energies organized. And so that's why this is such a primary part of that teaching. Can you maybe speak a little bit about just that, like from the masculine perspective of being relating with somebody that's in the feminine hypervigilance, like what you notice about that, and also sort of the nature of masculine to want to offer something to that.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. In other words, trying to fix it and make it go away and like, okay, then we'll have peace and it won't be. Yeah, that happens. This point around the heart of the yin, where we've got the arrow going and the fire is at the heart, and then if it overflows and is built up, then it overflows and then starts to have fire underwater and then start to warm up the water. A big part of that is, I think, as you were just saying, this notion of mystery. That from the water side, what is being communicated is deep acceptance, total safety, It's just okay to be who we are and to feel actually really, in the best sense, familiar and known. The fire is the part of us that wants to be exotic, that wants to be mysterious, that wants to have fire and like, who are we? And who's this person around the campfire? And they like, and I see them at their nighttime self, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, there's like mystery there, and they're not just, oh, the person that I've lived with for 20 years, and I know they do this and they do that, and they grew up here and blah blah blah. Like to be completely, again, this is the paradox and the fun of playing with fire and water in this process is like to be totally safe and to know someone in real safety, and then also to get to be primal and wild and mysterious and not have the mystery or the wildness be wild but scary and uncontained, as you were saying, and therefore potentially unsafe or dangerous, but also not to have the familiarity or the domesticity become over familiarity or boring or, as you said, it just gets stagnant. So there's this, I think, really important place of from the yang disposition, learning to aim towards that heart. And that's going to have, while communicating two things at the same time. One, total safety and acceptance. Two, allure. And to keep playing with the combination of those two and just keep sending little missives, little, Cupid arrows over that way, little love notes, whatever it is, with, fire is where the desire is, water is where the healthy detachment and a okayness with whatever is already the case is happening. So when again we get the combination, we get someone who has a deep connection to desire and longing and yearning without neediness. And so I think one of the key things from the yang disposition, the yang gaze, is to communicate simultaneously allure and really deep interest without neediness and clinginess. And then that kind of like, icky undercurrent or thing that can come with it that can be, feel invasive and off-putting emotionally and energetically. When it's kind of accepting and very empathetic and compassionate, but doesn't have the allure, then it will feel safe and really trustworthy. And that's a lovely thing. And that might lead to a wonderful friendship or close connection in that way. But if we're talking here specifically where we want to play with fire and water, we need all that water to generate the safety and the trust, but also the fire to create some allure and some more pointed, without being icky, dynamic.
Is
And
this
I think it's that combination that creates exhale when there's
okay?
frazzle or it's a little here. It's like to actually feel first more of the water of just safety. It's okay. There's presence, there's containment. And then from there, if it slowly starts to get a little bit of the fire in there, then that's an even deeper exhale and invites both fire and water in the other. Because one of the principles and why it's the fire goes under the water is that energy has to move from yang to yin. Yang is directive and yin is receptive in terms of the polarity of energy. So therefore, that's why of the four options, we're starting with the fire of the yin person. Because it has to be, that's where the energy can actually move in their being. It will eventually move down to unite with the deeper reservoir of their feelingness. But in order for there to be movement, it's got to actually start on the fire side,
It's quite a
which
kind
is
of,
to say their heart,
which is to
their,
say that we have to
their,
start
de-
with the love. Ah.
their devotion and the sweetness and the, yeah.
It's this really kind of, I kind of marvel at being able to work as a woman in a feminine design with women, how there's such a variety of things happening all the time. It's not, it's like there's a lot going on. And so it's this common theme where it's like, I want safety. I'm longing for safety. I'm longing to experience safety, but not too much safety because that's boring. I want to feel safety and then I want something to come out of left field and surprise me. And then I'm exhilarated and then I'm turned on. And then I don't, but don't exhilarate me too much because now I feel like it's unsafe. And so then it's like this really, it's an artful dance in my experience, this artful dance of becoming conscious of our animal bodies in a world where our animal bodies have been minimized as a priority in some way or another, or medicated or pathologized or, made shameful in some way. Uh, One of the kind of neat things that I like to teach, I teach a lot about the molecules of emotion and how they show up in the system, and shame is one of them. I'll just speak to shame a little bit sort of briefly because I find this way of looking at shame really empowering for people to understand. And it's a very befriending way to look at the molecule of shame, or embarrassment is another way of saying, whenever we're like learning the landscape of these lands that we're, looking at the potential of playing in consciously, one of the things that can be helpful to understand is there's creatures along the way, and shame is one of the creatures along the way in this journey that can be like helpful to notice, oh yeah, that's there, that's part of the journey. Also, sometimes it's just like, another way of describing shame is like embarrassment, where it's sort of this feeling of like, oh, I'm like a little bit embarrassed about whatever experience is arriving on the bandwidth of your conscious experience. So shame is a neat one to speak to in terms of this kind of safety in combination with a little bit of risk or a little bit of exhilaration, in that for most women, there is at some point an experience of being more vulnerable than, we'll just say a masculine expression. You could say a man, but it can be anybody that's really a dominant yang authority in some way. And how that can trigger an experience in our body that is there for a very good reason. There's been many, many years of repression for women in the feminine experience because of the fact that we're built with a stature, typically, that is smaller. So in the timeline of having a woman's body or being related to the experience of being in a feminine experience, there are these natures that have evolved. And one of them is that a man is bigger and could cause violence or kill us if he chose to. And there's this subtle awareness of that can be going on underneath all the time. And one of the evolutions that feminine disposition has been able to use in order to defend themselves against a stronger, bigger, more potentially violent experience is shame, the capacity to shame as a way to attack back. And this shows up in relating as well, this pattern where a woman might shame, or a yin might use shame as a defense pattern. This is a defense strategy. And I like to kind of teach this because it really helps us empower. If that's showing up, it's an indication of fear. It's simply an indication of like transformation and fear. If you watch the last masterclass, we talked a lot about turning from the ancient survival nervous system, not excluding it, but including and transcending that there's this intelligence that's here, and maybe fear is here, and maybe an experience of shame is here. And with my attention to self in an experience where there's an attention, where there's also a bigger container, these molecules can change, and they have this really beautiful transformative impact, so that a pattern that was the way we related to ourselves and the way we knew ourselves in our belief system of self will break down, and a new experience of self with a greater imprint of love, a greater imprint of potentiality, a greater imprint of connectivity, aka healing, can emerge as a result of that. And I like to kind of teach this about shame and embarrassment because one of the things that embarrassment does is like if we in some way injure a dynamic or a relationship, or we were injured or in a relationship where we were injured by a dynamic, then it's the same molecule that we're alchemizing. It's the same molecule that goes back and rewrites it if we're willing to look at it and create a greater space of intelligence around it. So that portal to and deepening in our connections has these intelligent molecules to work with, and so safety is part of it. I like the teaching that you have of like, the venom and the medicine, the poison and the antidote being very similar. Should we touch on performance versus play a little bit? And then I'd love
Mm,
to give
hmm
people like just a little practice of there's two things that I want to make sure that we include before we
hmm
wrap up this. One of them is related to this performance over play piece for yang or the masculine disposition. And then that space of, connecting the fire and the
hmm
water, which you spoke about, but then leading into this place of like the holding back, like we can wrap it up with the homework of the close to kissing homework for people that are wanting to start just playing with the energies right, as soon as possible, as soon as they are able to get curious and start getting into the play of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think thanks. That's those are yeah, those are really good. Play versus performance is a huge one. Um so again, something that's been said, but just to reiterate it, because it's really important here with the play versus performance. As long as someone is occupying the yin polarity, the fire's in their heart, the water's in their sexual organs. So that could be two men, a gay couple, and one is the yin and one is the yang. In which case, that was an image of two men. One would have the water at the heart and the fire in the genitals, and the other would be the other way around. It could be two women. It could be a straight couple, and the man is the yin and is more yin or submissive, and the woman is the yang, in which case it would be flipped from the image on the screen. So it's really about which pole we occupy and where our fire and water is going to be located bodily. And if somebody is a switch, if they can actually, fairly agilely switch back and forth, or they 80 or 90% of the time like to be yin and every once in a while they want to be a dom or whatever, then they have to consciously reverse the polarization within their own body. So all that to say, a key part in this course is the first thing is about learning to connect fire and water within one's own self. And then to be able to have, if there's, connection with another or desire for that, how to set that up. So play versus performance for a yin, as mentioned earlier, probably looks like over caring about the pleasure of another or performing in that sense to make sure the other partner is now having a good time or whatever. For a more classic kind of yang way that the play versus performance thing shows up is this idea of being overly technical, or this idea that you can master a bunch of techniques and then it will like do things to someone else and have missed the entire portion of how do they actually come into arousal. It's not through techniques. It's not through what all those like we always joke about the, awful things in the grocery store, like 75 ways to make your man what I'm like, oh God, this is just the worst. No, you don't need any of that stuff. You don't need 1 to 75. Like if we know how arousal works and we actually orient it to the arousal of the one whose arousal cycle takes longer, then they will naturally orient to want to go into deep intimacy without it's no technique, there's no anything other than genuine, sincere energy that gives them a green light to actually enter into it. So you were talking about, if the yin is a woman or socialized as a woman, you've got your classic thing of like, the classic sort of stereotype that like men are the ones that have all this like sexual energy and women are like, sometimes say yes or not or whatever. But anybody who enters onto the yin polarity, any body, but especially female bodies, are capable of over the top, immense, over unity amounts of desire if they can be properly held, are given the proper safety and the time to actually transition, as you were saying earlier, from a predominantly yang way of being in the world, which is linear, to a non-linear, more circular yin disposition, and actually link up with the way their body actually wants to enter into eros and ecstasy. And if they're given the time to do that and the safety to go really slowly and gently with no agenda other than kind of just deepening connection and love and pleasure, then that, again, the old saying in Taoism is yin is a big pot of cold water, but if it's given enough fire underneath it, it becomes a raging inferno. And at that point, there is no performance going on. There's no faking it. There's no, any of that is not an issue. It is sincere and genuine entrance into primal, ferocious forms of, as you were saying earlier, like animal desire mixed with immense safety and consciousness. And so when we get to that kind of zone, there's not a performance going on in that sense. There's play, there's wild, primal, the intelligence, the organic intelligence of our bodies that actually knows how to do this with each other, but that we've been culturally conditioned out of. And then we're just returning home to this native intelligence and giving it a safe space to kind of take over, basically. How's that sound?
Yeah, I just love that you're underscoring this part, which I like to help people remember, and that is like there's a restoration happening here. It's not a, if you are like interested in experiencing the longing and the hunger experience of life and the sensual pleasure experiences of life, that's a longing from your yin. However you experience that, that is what that is. And when that longing actually becomes actualized in the body and like opened to is this really beautiful restorative experience of coming to know yourself more deeply, coming to claim yourself more deeply, coming home to yourself. And we're going to talk more about that in the next episode. Um,
It builds in bodily consent.
yeah,
So it really starts allowing a process not just to use the words, but in a real, genuine way to actually be oriented to where the yes is and to follow the yes. And for that to be full and whole unto itself wherever it goes without a yang disposition, an orientation to a principally yang disposition has an outcome, has an end goal, as you were saying earlier. It has like a pre-scripted, okay, this is step one, this is step two, this is step three, here's the end. And usually too quickly for most, let's be honest. But
efficiently.
yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. But um, when we see that the arousal time for the yin is so different, they haven't even really entered as much as it's happened. This is where like the dissociation or the dissatisfaction comes in. They haven't even really hit the square one of their experience yet before it's officially over.
Yeah,
It's over before it even started for them.
yeah,
And so when it's actually, and it's confronting often, again, this is where the deconditioning and the coming home piece comes in, is can be really confronting for someone to be given the green light. Like it's actually okay for you to completely go into your own process, however long it takes, with no other agenda than just being totally present and loving and connected through it.
yeah.
And they're like, really? Isn't that selfish? Isn't that bad? Isn't that wrong? And blah, blah, blah. So that's where some of the shame in a fun way and the humility comes in to say, yeah, actually, here's a really deep green light.
To take up so much space, to get really wide.
And then to actually orient to an experience of what real consent and when, again, when the yin is a receptive energy. When it's aroused and turns on, it wants to receive. It wants to receive intensified sensation. It wants to feel, and then that will be asked for. And then it's a whole different experience than all the stories about having to get or like how to, all this manipulation and ickiness. It's like, no, no, if you set it up this way, it's like they actually long for this. There will be no problem of whether the messaging will be explicit or not.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's not subtle.
It's not so. And if it's not obvious, then there's more time to do to
Huh.
stoke the fire if
Yeah.
that's wanted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this practice of close to kissing for people,
Mm.
start to engage in like different ways of stoking the fire and as a really practical experience of flirting with your own fire and developing an awareness of these energies already in your body. One of the homework practices that we're going to offer for today is called Close to Kissing, but I just want to like also just like you're going to want to check out the next video because some of the things that we're talking about now about that whole yin process and this long arc of the yin process is in episode 3.
Where we'll go into quite a bit of detail.
Yes. Like steamy details. I'm gonna push Chris to go into super steamy details and you're gonna see him blush.
Look, I'm currently doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Um, you'll probably see me blush too because it's healthy to have good circulation in your body and to feel, our Eros doesn't need to be made to be bad and wrong. It can be something that is an aliveness, as we're saying. But in playing with that, in playing with these forces of energy, one of them that is the sort of like, here's an invitation for experiencing it. If you have a person that is willing to play close to kissing, it's difficult with pets. They tend to just go right. Be helpful if you have a partner to play with this. But it's also to and I'll let you kind of just, share on it and then get everybody to lead them through an experience of that. But is this place where it's like sometimes we need a little bit less in order to build our own fires, to build that experience of eroticism. And one of them that's been really sweet is just this practice of close to kissing. So why don't you lead people through that as if they were kind of being able to take it as a transmission and then go and try it on their own.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so this one's for the couples. Um, a variation for those who are single would be the if you're more yin, if you're single and you would want to be receptive, really like close the eyes and imagine someone that you potentially have some feelings for, and imagine them doing this process, you with them. Or if you were the single young person, imagine you're the one playing with the going closer and pulling back a little bit. So, so for the couples, again, all of this predicated on we're looking to stoke the heart slowly and gently of the yin. Not as a way, not as just a more subtle way to get to the traditional goal, but to actually change the entire intention to be what I call a goalless goal or an agendaless agenda of just deeper love and connection as the end itself, not as a means to an end. So if the fire's in the heart, it's entirely a chest up process, meaning it might be if there's closeness and you want to put a hand on each other's hearts, that's an option if that feels good. Some eye gazing maybe is a soft entry point. And then it's the space of getting like close to kissing, but then not. And you just set like a timer, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And for the purposes of the process, really keep the cleanness and the clarity of that container. So, in other words, if you do get some fire going, go take a little break afterwards and then try it again another time. And then, if you want it, if it's consensually wants to go other places, great. But make sure it's not felt. It's really important for the yin to feel like it's okay for them to actually just go into this process and not have to go somewhere else. So, 5 or 10 minutes where you agree to choose to want to do this, and then that's the completion of the process. And it's whole and it's complete unto itself. And just get, when it feels right, close. And it's on the neck or the cheeks or the lips. And when you go close, if you're the yang, and then you pull back slightly and then go in, you'll start to feel just like as if you would do with your hands. You like rub your hands together and then like go like this. You'll feel that pulse. You can feel it get like closer. Ooh. You can feel like almost like rubber bands. Just a little energy ball there, and you can play with it. And you'll feel that tension. That's the eros when you go closer and then pull back just slightly. And this is part of, from the yang or the dom point of view, as we said earlier, sending the message of want but not need. So if you can send that message bodily of like, I'm right here, I'm really present, there's clearly a lure, but I'm not going to cross the line and try to go into grabby or get mode. And then that's going to start to stoke the fire for the yin and watch how they respond to being close, not too close, close, present, allured, desired, wanted, but not it start to feel clingy or needy because you've made the agreement, we're just doing this for this time. And there's some healthy detachment from the yang that they're not crossing over the line. And watch in particular, if you're the yang, as you slightly pull back, the yin will like maybe lean towards, and then you're starting to get the sense of the play and the dance between. It's very safe, it's very fun. Obviously, at any point, if stuff gets a little too intense, just stop and just be really gentle and caring with each other.
It's super fun, and I can't imagine any girl that like grew up that didn't have like that experience of like imagining the boy that or the girl that they wanted to kiss, and like it's familiar is the other sweet thing about this. There's like a familiarity there. But there's a reason that the word is called polarity. You want to play with those poles. You want to play with that energetic pole. And so that like hand exercise is the same thing. Those are the poles. We want to get familiar with how that energy is circulating in your orbit, how that energy is circulating in somebody else's orbit, that you already know how to work with these energies. They're subtle, but they're also, there's big fire. There's big water and there's big fire. And we know how to play with big water and big fire. We can play with fire water. And then we can take it on a journey with our containment. And in the next episode, we're going to take you on the long journey. Thanks, Chris. Stay tuned, y'all.
Thank you, everybody.